My name is Lincoln Saunders. Today I serve as the Chief Administrative Officer for the City of Richmond. At the time of monument removal, I was Chief of Staff to Mayor Stoney. And so kind of from the early hours of him considering weighing monument removal to, or also some of our early discussions with the governor's office as they were considering what they were going to do, particularly around the Lee Monument, to when we were working with Team Henry and his group to mobilize the crane crew and get set up to actually move forward with removal, was kind of there for all those steps and conversations. With the monuments, there's been obviously a lot of discussion about their role in the lost cause and in kind of supporting the whole era of Jim Crow and all the messes they said from their first days to their last. But in the context of kind of the late 2010s and particularly in 2020, I think they symbolize that Richmond was not the welcoming and inclusive place that, I think we and others as leaders in the community wanted to believe Richmond was and wanted to see Richmond further become. I think it symbolized that, for some it meant that there was, a part of the city that wasn't welcome to them, whether Monument Avenue, and the sense that kind of further drove the sense that we were two Richmonds and two communities. Again, I think it's meant they were put up with the spirit of intimidation and of the constant reminder of the racial tension we have as a community, or historically have had. So, again, I think at the end of the day, it said that Richmond was still stuck in its past and was not truly as welcoming and inclusive as it should be. I think we simply, as a community, got to the place where we were no longer willing to tolerate that there was, kind of some of the old tropes around, well, this is history and you can't replace history, or these are symbolizing, kind of a twisted view of honorable people who were simply fighting for their community, etc. I think we just, writ large as a community, we're just tired of that debate of that giving that view the same validity as, or letting that excuse continue in the face of knowing what message those monuments sent to a huge portion of our community about who we are and what we value or what we don't value. And so, obviously, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and its civil unrest, I think the community was speaking up, and the fact that we would have protests at multiple monuments at the same time, it just reinforced that these symbols aren't who we are as a community. They don't speak to who we want to be going into the future, and it was beyond time for them to go. If you look back in the early part of Mayor Stoney's term, when he formed the Monument Avenue Commission, and we had historians and leaders like Christy Coleman and Ed Ayers helping to engage the community in a dialogue, with essentially coming out of it with the recommendations that the Jefferson Davis Monument needed to go, but we could contextualize other monuments. That may have been an option or been a valid step at the time, but by the time we were in 2020 and by the time we were grappling with the issues that the murder of George Floyd raised around social justice, I think the time for contextualization had passed, and it was time to just go all the way to removal. Sure. I'm going to have to kind of be vague on my dates here because I'm trying to remember them exactly, but when the mayor and Governor Northam both stood at the state capitol and said that they were both going to move forward with removing the monuments on Monument Avenue, kind of in the early days of June, we immediately went to work figuring out how we were going to get it done. Myself, our DCAO for operations at the time, Bob Seidel, the mayor, and others were trying to figure out, kind of logistically, how would we make this happen? Our operations team called around to all the contractors that we knew who, kind of had the technical expertise, the equipment to do something like this, to deal with the bronze and the granite. And, as has been, widely shared, no one was interested in taking the job. It was viewed as either too risky or not something they wanted to participate in, or, kind of not wanting to take the heat that was going to come from being, one of the, being a business that was involved in this process. We really struggled to find anybody who was willing to even consider doing it. Eventually, we talked to our friends in the governor's office at the state, who were also working on their Lee Monument plans for removal, and they, shared that Team Henry had, been willing to partner with them on that front, and suggested we give them a call and see if they would be willing to take on this additional project or this additional work. And so we started in real conversations and dialogue. At the same time, and where I was primarily focused was in conversations with the city attorney's office, as well as outside legal experts, about what the laws were around monument removal in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The General Assembly that earlier that year had changed the state law from saying that essentially, no locality could act to remove a monument award, to saying that, come July 1st when the law took effect, localities could pursue removal. So we were, keep in mind, we were in the early days of June. July 1st is around the corner, but we were also seeing that, every day these monuments were a point of conflict. We had groups that would, when the terrible event at the Lee Monument happened with the gassing of essentially the wrong crowd, and part of that came from the confusion around, we had protesters at, I believe it was the Jeb Stuart Monument, who had sawed through a portion of the statue. They had ropes around it, and they were, kind of actively trying to pull it down, which we had seen in Portsmouth had led to, a very traumatic injury for one person and put a lot of other people at risk. When, it's coming down in an act of protest versus experts actually doing the removal and doing it safely. So we had protests at multiple monuments. There was, the police and the response were, being directed to try and figure out, how to keep people safe in multiple locations. And then, again, the terrible mistake of going to the Lee Monument when the direction was to go to the Stuart Monument, or the expectation was to direct those forces to the Stuart Monument to disperse the crowd and keep people safe. Again, we just could not, we didn't want to wait any longer than we had to move forward with removal and to take essentially these lightning rods from our community, taken out of our community. So we started working. We looked at legal, theories around, what the mayor had the power to do in order to keep the community safe from a public safety standpoint in a state of emergency. I think at that time we were under 3 different states of emergency related to COVID, civil unrest, etc. So we were looking at, okay, can we move forward under the mayor's emergency powers, in a state of emergency to move forward with this removal. We got, very public at the time, but a lot of pushback from the city attorney, very clearly feeling that it was not within the mayor's power to do so. Again, at the same time, we're coordinating, trying to get, the cranes here in the city, get the contractors in to be prepared for that removal. As we approach July 1st, we felt from our own outside legal counselors, we had support from Hunt Andrews Kurth was donating legal time on a pro bono basis. We had other leaders in, kind of historic resources, attorneys like Greg Werkheiser, and others who were kind of, again, helping us find a legal path forward for monument removal. And whereas we on our side still felt that there was a strong case to be made that the mayor had the authority before July 1st, I think there was broader consensus that we think it was a much stronger argument to be made that on July 1st, when the new state law took effect, saying that localities had the authority to remove, that at that point the mayor's emergency powers were sufficient to enable him to, under a state of emergency, the city's emergency manager, which is, at that point is the mayor, has the authority to bypass certain processes, to do things on a more expedited basis, if it's in the interest of public safety, which we very firmly felt that this was. So on July 1st, when we had the team from Team Henry had been essentially, we'll call it staged and ready to go a couple of days prior to July 1st. When we got to July 1st, there was a public meeting with City Council where this topic was discussed, but at the end of that conversation, it was still, essentially the conclusion was, if the mayor believes this is within his authority, then the mayor should act. And so the mayor did, and he authorized Team Henry to deploy to go out and start removal. And so we started with Stonewall Jackson that day, and over the subsequent days, we're able to move forward with the additional removals of both of the statues as well as some of the other call it artifacts or articles like the cannons and other plaques that were along Monument Avenue, including the Soldier and Sailors Monument in Church Hill. We were just simply able to move forward and take that significant action, which both, I think, removed the lightning rods as well as made it very clear to the community and to the world that Richmond is a different place. We are no longer the capital of the Confederacy. We are the capital of compassion. We want to be the capital of inclusivity. We want everyone to feel welcome in this city. And I would say, if you look at the data around just tourism in the city and in the region, we've seen the benefit of that. We've seen that people all of a sudden think Richmond isn't stuck in the past. So Richmond, they're hearing about how great all of our other assets are, whether it's our restaurants, to the river, to the history that you can find at the Valentine Museum or Richmond's Black History Museum. We have a lot of history to talk about, but we're not talking about it in the same way that I think the world thought Richmond viewed its history. The biggest difficulty was around that legal case, and in the city of Richmond, the city attorneys and their opinions carry a significant weight, right? For many departments, for many departments there is a strong sense that you can't move forward without we'll call it the blessing of the city attorney's office. And so that created challenges with us from a procurement standpoint, right? So our procurement director at the time, was concerned about our ability to procure a contractor to do this work. if it wasn't clear that the actions that they were endeavoring for them to take on were legal. And then it also, it impacted what the police department felt they could do from a supporting the act perspective. And so, the position of the city attorney, which at the time was, instead of taking the position that, here was their concerns about the legal argument or what the potential outcomes could be in a court case if it was challenged or et cetera, took a much more definitive position, which limited our ability to make a business decision about what was in the best interest of the city and for the mayor as the emergency manager to make the decision he thought was in the best interest of the citizens of Richmond. And so that kind of had a cascading effect. And even down to the very day of the monument removal, our barrier was being able to ensure the security and safety of the construction crew doing the removal. The city sheriff at the time, even though the police department did not feel that they could support and provide the sort of protection that they normally would for, a project like this, something happening in the middle of city streets and something that was going to draw out a lot of people who wanted to witness either some for, some against, for the removal or against the removal. We saw that even on the day of folks, kind of trying to jump in front of the crane, so to speak. But the sheriff was willing to take the risk and support the removal. So she deployed her teams to provide the sort of security perimeter for the construction team. But I can tell you it was touch and go. If the sheriff hadn't been willing to go out there with us and move forward, we were going to be in a tough place. The construction crew couldn't move forward without being able to ensure the safety of their crew. And we were, we had mobilized them to come from Connecticut, I believe, down to Richmond, and so we were, we were going to be on the hook for the costs of that. And so if we were not able to move forward with removal, I think it would have been a real problem. It needed to happen for safety, and B, we felt strongly that we should and needed to be able to move forward. And I think, a lesson for me in this whole conversation, the whole issue was around, ensuring that the emergency manager for the city, be it the mayor, the chief administrative officer, or our regular emergency management coordinator, which is a position in the city, have the authority to act on behalf of the citizens of Richmond for their safety and security, and not, letting really anything get in the way of that. And so, there's been a lot of lessons learned in the relationship between the city attorney and the policy makers and the administrators who have to make a business decision, or make a decision based in the interests of the citizens, even if it's not abundantly clear what the law says, right? So, there's a reason our court system is based on two attorneys arguing the merits of a case and the letter of the law. We felt like we had a strong case, that the mayor had the authority, and so when we moved forward, we were confident in our ability to defend our actions. I can tell you, in the mayor's office, the calls, the threats, the vitriol, the slurs that were, that our staff had to hear, either in, when they answered the phone and a pro-Confederate person was on the other line, screaming and throwing slurs at our staff. I hated that, that they had essentially had to listen to that. It would be left in voicemails or sent in emails. things that were threatening either to the mayor or the city overall. There was, I think in all sorts of areas, whether it's, on news articles or et cetera, people would comment, and we'll never go to the city again, et cetera. The city will never, no one will ever go to the city again. Again, I think it's validating to show that our tourism numbers have not only met but far exceeded our tourism numbers from before monument removal. That those folks were wrong. But you also had the threats to Mr. Henry, to the construction team out of Connecticut. There was a lot that was scary about taking this act, and if you look in the recent history of monument removals, there was removals that took place in New Orleans where the company that was involved in it, was actually attacked. Someone had placed a bomb in their car. So there was real reason to fear what people would do in response to this act that we were taking. Luckily, to date, to my knowledge, no one has been, actually harmed or but I know whether for the mayor, for Mr. Henry, and for several others, the threats were very real and intimidating, and particularly, if you had young kids at home or, as I know Mr. Henry did, it's a scary thing to know that your actions are putting you and your family at risk. Yeah, I mean, again, we were, so in a state of emergency, the normal rules around procurement as far as, having to do a elongated bid or RFP process don't apply, simply because, in an emergency you have to move quickly. I am very confident that we did everything we could to get as many firms interested in bidding as we possibly could, but given the nature of the work, no one else was interested other than Team Henry. And I think, we as a broader community owe him a great debt of gratitude for being willing to step up and do the risky thing. We were referred to him by the governor's team, who had already identified him as a contractor. The State Department of General Services had gone through the same process we had of calling all of their contractors or contacts and trying to find somebody, and Devon Henry was the only one who they had found willing to do it. And so when they referred him to us, we started working with him on, kind of logistics and cost, and, getting him ready to go when we were ready to go. Well, again, we didn't have the luxury of going through a long engagement process with the community with, town hall meetings, et cetera. We had done a lot of that through the Monument Avenue Commission, and so we had gotten a lot of community feedback during that process, both from people who lived in Richmond and people who lived outside of Richmond. I think what we saw in the days after the murder of George Floyd was the community was speaking, and so I think their input was very clear that they were right, that I believe the broader community, those both protesting physically, on site, as well as those speaking up in social media or in, letters to the city, we're making it clear that this was, we're ready. It's time, and so I think, while again we didn't have the opportunity going through a formal process, I think the community's voice was loud and clear. I think that, first of all, I think we can teach history without aggrandizing some of the figures who were involved in that history. Removing Confederate monuments doesn't mean we stop teaching about the Civil War and the history before the Civil War and the history after the Civil War, going through the Jim Crow era, civil rights movement to modern day. So I do believe that public spaces can be a big part of telling that story. And I think the question is, what is the emphasis and what are the lessons we're looking for people to take away from? Are we trying to repeat the fallacy of, the noble rebel, or are we educating about the tragedies and the horrors of that era? I think the Richmond slave trail is a great example of you can explain and tell and have people kind of experience and feel what that must have been like for those who were brought here against their will and forced into labor and sold at auction. I think our work with the Shako Project and both telling the story of the Devil's Half Acre up to the burial grounds, building a museum, the National Slavery Museum, is an important part of the story to tell. And Richmond, given its role as the second largest site for the slave trade, we have an obligation to tell that story. And I think we're looking, again, whether you're looking at the slave trail or the Shako Project, and dedicating that space to telling that story, and all the terrible things that happened there. That is one way we can use public spaces to tell that story. I think using the statue to Maggie Walker tells another part of our story. The Valentine, if you look at how they have taken the Jefferson Davis statue and displayed it in its current form, not in a restored form, but with the with the paint and the smashed head of the statue from it being pulled down by protesters and drove through the street. That tells a real story about 2020 and what we as a community were feeling, experiencing, and doing. So at public spaces and telling the story is important, but I think what you've seen or what we've seen in Richmond is that we don't want to continue to see these statues glorifying Confederate generals and then place a small plaque with the real context about what they stood for and what they did. We want that piece to be the story that we tell, with a megaphone, not, kind of hide it under a bushel, so to speak. Well, look, I think part of it is that there was nothing about this that was easy. Making the decision and for the mayor and knowing that, and again, you have to look at it in the full context. We know what happened in New Orleans. We saw what happened in Charlottesville, et cetera. So there was a real sense and real fear that I can tell you from my experience that I knew the mayor was feeling and going through around, it wasn't a question of whether monument removal was the right thing. The question is, what was the other side going to do in reaction? And was that going to put Richmonders in harm's way, in a different way than what we were seeing with folks trying to, physically pull them down themselves and the risk that entailed. And so, there's always, looking back and feeling like, I wish we could have moved even sooner, earlier in June. But realistically, I think we the city, the mayor, moved as quickly as we could with all the variables and all the risks that had to be weighed to make this possible. Again, as I mentioned earlier, when we weren't sure we could secure the construction team and make them safe, I can tell you, for me personally, I felt that, it was so stressful and so frustrating to be so close and being afraid we weren't going to be able to get off the ground and get the statues removed. So like there was tremendous risk for all parts, whether it was from just the procurement and the spending the money to make this happen, to okay, what happens when we're removing them? What happens after we're removing them? What is the counter response going to be, right? So it's easy today to sit back and feel that it was an obvious decision and kind of an easy call, so to speak. But it was nothing of the sort in the moment. It was stressful. It was scary. It was risky, but it was so clearly the right thing to do, both from a community standpoint, right, as far as who we are and who we wanted to say what we say we represent, and clearly from a public safety standpoint, given what we were experiencing every day for the month of June. But you never know, kind of what's on the other side of a decision until you've made it and and you're there. And so there was a lot of unknowns about how it would play out and what happened next. If I can go on a little bit of a tangent here. So I grew up with the name Lincoln. And I grew up in rural Virginia on the Chesapeake Bay. And for my father particularly, he was trying to send a message of what his values were and what he chose for my name. And so it was kind of surreal as somebody who grew up with the name Lincoln in Virginia to be a part of this work. I'm very proud both of what the values that my father and mother instilled in me, my father always felt that the name Lincoln was a name to live up to, and I hope that in being part of this and being that, for me it's a piece of living up to that charge that they gave me, and the values that they enforced through my entire life, not just the values I hold today.